Okay. So before we proceed with our discussion, so that I could get your feedback, we could have a little bit of interaction. Could please everyone go to slido.com, and then there's a box that you need to enter a webinar code. Please enter the webinar code PACT webinar 2, and then join an existing event. And then let us wait for everyone to join the event for around 1 minute. But if you have an existing QR code scanner, please scan the QR code scanner on your screen. So para po you don't need to go anymore to the slido.com website. So you don't need to install the app. It's web-based. You can use your phone, your laptop, and I hope you could join us so that you could immediately gauge your interaction. So maybe for a minute. Okay. So actually the code naman po is visible on our screen. So for example, uh, on the left side of my screen, there's again the code, the hashtag PACT webinar 2, and the QR code at the start. So, okay po. Before we proceed with the discussion, I would like to ask, how do you conduct your chemistry laboratory classes last school year? Or maybe even not school year, for maybe since you started teaching chemistry. For example, me, I've taught chemistry maybe 5 years ago. I'm young with this profession, although I'm not uh, actively teaching right now, but still engaged with the with education activities. So for some of you, you may enter your answer on the active poll by clicking in slido.com. For those who would like to recite, raise your hand and volunteer. You may unmute po and share uh, your insights or your experience on how you used to conduct your classes. Okay. So anyone po who would like to share. So if you would like to share po, unmute lang po and please introduce yourself, maybe a little bit of your affiliation so that we could know what grade level are you teaching.
Hello, good morning.
Hello, good morning po.
Good morning. I'm Hazel Ramirez, and I'm currently affiliated at the University of the Philippines Rural High School. So I'm teaching senior high school chemistry. So actually, we
Mhm.
have hands-on conduct of our lab classes, which include pre-lab, activity proper, and post-lab. And we're using the laboratory classes at the Institute of Chemistry. So we have the students are conducting their laboratory activity by group, and
Mhm.
wherein each group is composed of 4 to 5 members. But the students are asked or are required to do the activity sheet individually. So that's our conduct of laboratory classes for the past school year.
Thank you, Miss Hazel. So I think based on our active poll po, no, most of us are really teaching our laboratory classes face-to-face, hands-on. And there was one response who told us that they skipped the laboratory classes last semester because of the COVID-19 crisis. And actually, there are certain suggestions also coming from the Commission on Higher Education that for laboratory classes, they may choose it or they may choose to implement it on the next semester. So we're trying to wait for their response. But actually, since we don't know, we really have to prepare ourselves and our students on how do we plan to conduct our laboratory classes for this school year. And I think most of you has been telling me hands-on group laboratory. And I think it's very common for us. And then another question, which of the following strategies do you mostly use in conducting laboratory classes? Do you mostly use hands-on lab or mostly digital ones or a mix of digital lab and the hands-on lab? Yeah. So we're getting around 22. That's fast response. And we're around 110 here. Yeah. Thanks for all who are joining the active poll. So I think based on the initial response, we're really used to doing the hands-on lab because I think we we can't really implement chemistry without the mixing of the test tubes, the mixing of the reagents, so on and so forth. And I remember my chemistry prof always telling us that chemistry, the chemistry activities should, teaching chemistry should always have the demonstrations, the actual demonstration of how those molecules, reagents react, so that you could easily visualize it. Yeah. So most of us are doing the hands-on lab. For me, I actually started teaching 5 years ago. I'm teaching in a junior high school. At the time, there was no K to 12, so I'm teaching the purely chemistry classes, and I think that's the last year of teaching chemistry. The school where I first taught don't have a laboratory at the start. They do have, but it's not functioning. So I have to conduct classes anywhere, like inside the classroom, or whenever it's available, it's in the library or it's the canteen, as long as there's a long table. And as you will see here, since at the start of the school year, I don't have that much glasswares because I have to gather them. I don't know where are they, or at least I have to do the inventory. There's no reagent. I do it by demonstrations, just most of us. But in this case, I also do the demonstration by the students. So the students do in front of the class. And the ones that you see is the iodine clock reaction. So it's basically starch, iodine, and the vitamin C solution, the vitamin C iodine clock reaction. And then later on, we have a sort quote of functioning lab, but not really functioning. There are just three very long tables. There's no water, but there is electricity. But if you will see, I think the tables are good enough for us to perform the laboratory experiment. So when I started teaching, from having me doing the demo, my student, at the end of the school year, I was able to divide my students into five groups, into groups of five students, and every one of them are really doing the activities, just like the activities that you should do. Meaning everyone should really participate. It's not the teacher just doing it, preparing it, so on and so forth. And it really take me a long time to prepare for that because I have to inventory that I have to check the inventory of the glassware, even prepare my materials for that. So for the past years, we call it the dungeon lab. So at least by the end of the school year, they are not anymore uh, unfamiliar with all the glassware. They are not afraid that they will break one. Because, for example, if they break one, if they just break one test tube, because we have at the time a lot of test tubes, I think it's one now. It's okay for me as long as it's unintentional. But at least you see your students doing all laboratory demonstrations on their own makes everyone happy, especially the teachers. So yeah, if you will see here on the left side, there's no really sink. So if you will see, we have some sort of plastic containers just to do the lab. And I'm thankful for my students because they are the ones who are cleaning the glassware. They are the one who needs to get the water if you need it. So and they enjoy doing the laboratory. So if given opportunities, our students will really enjoy the hands-on laboratory. My students. We uploaded it to Wikimedia Commons so that everyone could see it. Actually forgot what is on the microscope, but I think the middle one is like methylene blue, and then the colorful one is the reaction of an acid-base indicator, the acid-base reaction. But instead of using, I think, eggplant or red cabbage, we use here duhat because one student asked me, "Sir, why don't we use duhat?" So we tried and we used duhat. Yeah. But the main question is, I think all of us were used to teaching that hands-on, face-to-face laboratory. How about this COVID year? The COVID year, this 2013 has been really volatile. The environment is volatile. You really don't expect what will happen. But as mentioned by our secretary, education must continue. So for this talk, I will be discussing the depth and distance learning modalities based on what I know, based on attending the webinars of our esteemed Undersecretary of Education. And then based on the different distance learning modalities, we'll try to provide suggestions on how could you implement your chemistry laboratory classes. So in setting up your distance learning laboratory classes, we actually enumerated some considerations that we should consider. First one is the student setup at home. Previously, if you're a teacher doing face-to-face laboratory classes, setting up laboratory classes is uh, your job. It's because you are the one who need to have the physical laboratory and the facilities arranged. You make sure that the sink is working, the lights are working, there are materials there. But right now, you also need to create your students' home as their own laboratory. And how could we help our students setting up their laboratories at home? We need to identify their chosen distance learning modality. If it's printed offline, if it's online digital, if it's purely online distance learning, so that we could help them set up. But it's not saying that we need to set up, like build the benches, build the tables, so on. It's more of creating a small space for them, a laboratory at home where they could conduct simple experiments to attain the learning goals, the objectives of our laboratory experiments. Second, and I think this is the one that is most needed, we need to align our previous ready-made materials to the current environment because not all of them, maybe around 75 or even less than, are the ones that can be easily transformed to the distance learning modality. Say, for example, of course, you can't distribute the reagents to your students, so you need to replace that laboratory with another laboratory experiment. So we need to identify what activities you can modify, you can alter for the distance learning setup, and some maybe really need modification. And this is the bulk of the work of the teacher because we need to create our contextualized laboratory manuals based on our localities or based on our needs and demands. And in searching for ready-made materials, I actually highly encourage everyone to search for open educational resources so that we could contribute to the OER domain. And it's been long overdue in the Philippines to contribute for OERs. OERs are materials that are in the public domain or has been in the open license. So when we say open license, we respect the intellectual property right of the owner, and the owner provides us access to reuse, repurpose, adapt that learning material. It's different from making it available because making it available, we have copyright claims. But this, the author really support the open movement. So whatever you would like to do with the material, as long as you cite them, that's fine for certain conditions. And those open licenses are usually our Creative Commons licenses. And what's more important on why we should choose OERs right now, it's because OERs are provided to us at no cost. So you don't need to pay, you don't need to have subscription. You could use them, you adapt them, redistribute it without having to think of copyright infringement and so on and so forth. So it's one of the most easy to locate materials right now for the sciences. And actually, we're happy in the sciences because there are a lot of open educational resources that we have. Unlike the other subjects such as say Filipino and Alaling Panlipunan. So we owe to our fellow scientists from other countries, from Europe and America and other parts of the world for creating those OERs. And right now, in these COVID years, the OERs will be triumph in helping our teachers. So if you want to search for materials that you could use for your laboratory experiments and even for your other needs at the classroom, you may look for these repositories. Among the four that I presented, my favorite is Merlot, the Multimedia Educational Resource for Online Teaching, and OER Commons. You could see here a mix of video, documents that you could use for your lecture and laboratory needs. You just need to cite them based on the copyright requirement of the material. Also, there are a lot of materials in YouTube, in Flickr, in Wikimedia Commons, and Vimeo that you could use for your laboratory experiments. For example, you need a photo of this one, of an actual experiment. You need a video demonstration. You could go to YouTube and search for it. And some of them are licensed also under the Creative Commons, meaning they are free. You don't need to uh, pay them royalties for using your materials, even if it is for commercial use. And our most favorite amongst all is the simulations that are really available. So I think everyone is familiar with the PhET simulations by University of Colorado. So I think if you attend webinars right now in the sciences, they will most likely talk about PhET because PhETs have been really helpful for us. And for those who are not aware, you could also modify the PhET simulations as long as you know how to code. Also, there are simulations from CK12 Foundation. It's a Singapore-based, I think, organization. And Oasis. Oasis is based in the United States. So they could provide you simulations, help you for your laboratory activities. And then also we have NASA, Open Science Ed, and MIT Blossoms. Open Science Ed and MIT Blossoms provide video lessons or laboratory video lessons for you to help you for your needs if ever there is a need for you to search for new ones. So we're done with the materials. So I just highlighted some of the materials that you could use in your laboratory classes. Okay. Then also, the third consideration is the availability of resources. So if you are teaching in the physical laboratory, the brick and mortar laboratory, you should identify the equipment, the supplies, the agents that you need. But actually, it may or may not be true right now because the laboratory right now is the home of your students. So we need to identify what are the readily available material at your students' home that they don't need to buy anything. For example, do they have salt to do this experiment? Then if you think most of them have salt, they don't need to pay for it, buy for it, they don't need to go out, then it's a good indication that the laboratory that you're planning may be done by your students. And then another one, if ever your students don't have the materials at home, how can the teacher and school help our students in order to meet the demands of the laboratory activities? For example, if we do need the lack of resources, we could perform kitchen chemistry experiments. It's actually helpful for me when I started teaching in high school that my school don't have uh, quote unquote a functional laboratory because I have to sort in doing kitchen chemistry experiments. And I think that if I will be teaching right now, at least I'm halfway prepared because I already know some kitchen chemistry experiments. But I know there are a lot of kitchen chemistry experiments available to us in front of us. And teachers need help in creating a list of them so that we could match it with the minimum essential learning competency set by the Department of Education. So on the photo, you will see here a teacher from Italy conducting laboratory classes in front of her laptop. But I actually don't recommend you perform in front of your laptop because your laptop might get wet. But at least the teacher has time to explore other options. As we all know, Italy was the first one hardly hit by the pandemic, and she actually literally performed it in her kitchen. So yeah. Teaching chemistry experiments, and I think everyone will agree that because there's a lot, we need help from one another in sorting and creating them. There's also a QR code. You may scan it. There's a crowdsourced document for virtual laboratories and other resources. It's crowdsourced by educators around the world. You may scan it so that you could check what are the available simulations with me that I could use. And I encourage you that if you are done sorting it, creating it, to share it with your fellow Filipino teachers so that we could help one another in this time of crisis. Also, this is one of my greatest frustrations because I would like to create one. Creating home science kits for students. I'm frustrated because I know in other countries like in the US and the Europe, uh, kids like ages 5 and below do can their parents can buy them home kits, readily available home kits that are safe for students. They could really perform the experiments at home. It's usually also available at museums. The last one I checked, it's quite expensive if you convert it to Philippine peso, around 1,000 to 2,000. This on the last uh, kit that I saw in Sweden. But it's actually helpful for us, for students, for kids, so that they could perform their experiments at home. I'm actually a fan of Professor Cora Salumbides lab box. It's a She conceptualized it with the Philippine Foundation for Philippine Science Center in Marikina. But the problem is that Professor Cora might need rethinking is to align it with the current K to 12 curriculum that we have so that you could easily match what experiments you could do uh, for this grade level using these materials. I'm not sure if the Philippine Science Center is still offering this one, but you could get the lab box from them. I think there's also a physics lab box. Also, there's a small startup called Tiny Labs. They're offering also a small lab in a box for students. For example, how to measure the length of the fish. You explore the scientific method. You also have some sort of the earth science ones. So you could buy your kids do them. And this is on a personal use per student because the lab box of Ma'am Cora Salindides is for the teachers. So it's like a box for teachers. It's a mobile laboratory. But this one, the ones being offered by Tiny Lab, is really for the students. There's a separate uh, kit for teachers, but you already get a kit for you. I don't know the price, but I think it's less than 1,000 for one experiment, one or and then this is quite new. There also one startup to release the biotech in a box. It's also for teachers. The materials are for teachers so that you could distribute it to their students. They try to investigate biotechnology topics at the high school, senior high school level. Yeah. So if you will see, we don't have that much yet, so we can't really explore that much. And hopefully some social entrepreneur or maybe some of you would release a kit of their own. Even not commercially, but at least a kit that you could use within your public school divisions, the district, or within your school system, so that the students would really feel that they are doing experiments at home. Of course, you need to provide some procedure, hazards, and notes and everything. Yeah. And then the other one, whenever we need to design the distance learning classes, we need to identify, do you need a facilitator to do this? Because in the usual face-to-face teaching, it is the laboratory teacher, the science teacher who does it. And for some, there's a laboratory teaching assistant if ever you have really huge classes. For me, I used to have a teaching assistant because my class is around 30 students and my class is and my class is for an all-birth class. So it's hard to monitor all of them. So at least I have someone help me oversee them. So whenever you design, you need to identify this your activity needs guidance, who will guide the students at home. And if ever that the activity would need guidelines, would need guidance, you need to have some sort of agreement with the parent or someone able to do so to guide the student, the kid, so that they could perform the activity. And the last one consideration is you as a teacher who wants to reinvent the teaching of laboratory classes this coming school year. And I actually would like to uh, give you a big round of applause because you're really into something bigger. You would really like to transform your classes and you are facing now the challenges that's being brought by COVID. And we actually don't know if the situation is only for a year, for the next year to come. But at least you have your whole heart trying to change your laboratory classes. in order to provide the quality, the best education for your students. So a big round of applause for everyone. So we outlined four. So first is the student setup. Second is the alignment of raw material. Do we have available resources and who will facilitate or if there's a need for uh, facilitating. So as you all know, DepEd released the alternative delivery modes. There are three ones: the distance learning, the blended learning, and the homeschooling. Our focus will be distance learning. Blended learning is just a combination of any of the distance learning modalities, and there's also homeschooling. And I think homeschooling is the one that is really established right now in the Philippines because homeschooling has been an alternative delivery mode for the past years. Under the alternative delivery modes, we have distance learning. And according to DepEd, distance learning, you don't need to physically go to schools. You just need to enroll into these three modalities. You have to be enrolled in the modular distance learning, wherein the school, the DepEd will provide you with modules, printed ones or digital ones, and you answer it on your own pace. I think depending on the agreement, if the student would submit every week, once a month, or the school will provide the weekly topics, the quarterly, monthly, so on. There's also online distance learning for those students who would like to, uh, who have internet access at home, who have devices, so they could enroll to the online distance learning modality. And there's another one, the TV radio-based instruction, which I think we will not be able to discuss right now. So we'll focus only on the modular one and the online distance learning. And DepEd actually provided a good flowchart on what is the difference between the three distance learning modalities. So if you have internet, you have good internet, you have devices, you go to the online distance learning. If you don't have internet at home, but you have devices, you could go for the offline one. But if definitely you really don't have any devices, you don't have internet, then you go to the printed one. So these are the difference. Between the modular distance learning, difference the format. Within the online distance learning, the mode of delivery. So for the printed one, let's go and identify each one. For the printed modular distance learning, you need to provide your students the printed worksheets from pre-lab, from the actual performance of the activity and the assessment. So everything must be written on a piece of paper. You need to provide documents to the students. And the feedback might not be as fast as online distance learning because you have to wait for the students to submit the paper. And it actually depends on the teacher. If say on week one it's pre-lab, the following week's actual performance, so that you could monitor the progress of the student if it's really prepared. But the question is actually the turnaround time because, for example, binagsak mo yung material sa student, and then he or she gets a new one, you don't check it uh, on the spot. So it needs several say, hours or days to check it. And they don't have any device at home. So what activities or experiment can you modify for the distance learning setup? You provide the simple, safe, and easy activity that could be done at home, provided that the students should have materials at home. Like, for example, if they're requiring salt and water, they should easily have it at home. And uh, it is assumed that they are safe. There's no hazard involved. And if you will see for printed tasks, since the students is just answering the module, it's more of an individualized task. There's not too much collaboration between fellow students because he or she doesn't have a means to communicate to students. If ever uh, he or she can communicate with the students, it may take quite a very long time. Uh, the key goal here for the printed modular distance learning is that your worksheets, your laboratory experiment should have clear and digestible steps in the procedure. So there are times that you need to assume that the students know it, but actually you need to provide it because they might not know it. So at least provide extra for the students, especially in providing the guidelines and the steps. And one key factor also of designing those printed modular distance learning is having or implementing the effective art of questioning. This by the means of providing guide questions, starting with the factual ones, and to the convergent, divergent, and then the evaluative questions. You need to carefully curate your questions so that the students would easily understand at the end of the experiment what is the goal of your experiment. You just don't need to ask the observations, they also need to analyze the observations and get conclusions from it. So that's printed modular distance learning. Uh, it will be another topic if we're going to discuss what frameworks do we need to discuss for the printed modular ones. Uh, how do we, what instructional theory are we going to use? Is 7E5 is still applicable for printed modular learning? I think that's another discussion. But if anyone would like to ask, uh, you may feel free to contact me at the end of this webinar. Also, in the printed modular distance learning, if ever the experiment could not be easily done, because say for example they need to titrate and the students don't have the ref at home, there are some practices also in the United States that the students only analyze the data from the previous years, and then hoping that when classes resume face to face, the students could really proceed do it in the actual laboratory experiment. So at least you solidify that truly the students would need the concept, and then later on we practice the skills face to face if ever we are already permitted to go out. So what are possible resources? So if for the student, it should be readily available at home at no expense to the students. For the teachers in schools, if ever you provide the kits to the students so that they will not think or look for any resource at home. But definitely, it's a no-no for you to ask students to buy those quote unquote reagents or chemicals, even if they are home or kitchen chemistry, unless you have a prior agreement your students. But for me, it has been my practice when I was teaching face to face that I ask students to bring small materials that we need to perform in the laboratory. For example, if we need to extract DNA in the laboratory, the students could bring onion, banana, strawberry, depending on their preference. I do this so that the students could realize the importance of resources because my very first experiment when I was teaching, because it's their first time also, they enjoy everything. They wasted a lot of reagent. So after that, I realized that they could bring materials that they could easily get at like bananas and onion. Of course, strawberry is like an option that's not required. And for printed one, we assume that there's need for no guidance, or for elementary students, a very minimal one. And if there's guidance needed, there should be a prior agreement with the teachers and with the parents that the student should be guided throughout the conduct of the quote unquote experiment. For example, for students doing printed ones, the elementary ones, uh, there's a lesson in chemistry 6 in grade 6 that the students would do separating of mixture. And I think every one of us during our elementary days did the evaporation of salt and water. So the students would do it with supervision of the parent. So at least there's some bonding between the parent and the student. So for those that will require heat, there must be really a requirement for the parent to help. And actually, the collaboration, it's whether it's traditional or online setup, it's a must so that we could monitor the progress of our students. Next one is the offline digital modular distance learning uh, setup. The difference between the printed one and the offline one is that you provide offline resources to the students either by providing USB kits or say the students have downloads, you install or upload, you slide load the materials to the tablet or to the cell phone of the student. So at least you don't need to print the worksheet. The only difference is that the students are not anymore confined to providing answers, assessments on a piece of paper. But since the student do have a devices, they could digitally enhance their submissions, their portfolio, uh, their evidence of learning by digital output. Because they have cell phone, they could take photos, they could take videos during the experiment. Uh, They could create the document, material, so on and so forth. They have a device because they have a device at home. But the difference is it might be quite hard to implement offline digital learning because the students are in the mode of being your own device. So they have a laptop, they have a tablet, they have a cell phone, they have a tablet reader, they have Kindle. And you have to make sure that the materials that you provide to them will work across all those platforms. Be it a laptop, be it a tablet, a cell phone, a tablet reader. For example, there are tablet readers that may have, say, uh, the word function, the creation of documents, so they can't do it, or it doesn't have a camera because it's like a Kindle only. So you have to check and identify. What activities can you done? It's actually also the same as the printed modular ones, but the simple, easy. It's individualized. It's still individualized because we're not sure if they have communication, if they can communicate through text, but if there's a way to communicate, that's good. And you still implement having clearly digestible steps and the good questioning. So the problem right now, as I've mentioned, is that you need to check the compatibility of your devices. For example, I provided a simulation to my students. Will it work with a tablet, a cell phone, tablet, cell phone, a computer? Will it work on Apple? Will it work on Windows? Will it work on other operating system? So technical compatibility issues is a big factor for it. And unless you go with the common one, like the PDF will be read by any device. It will be easier read by any device. So at least it's compatible for all. You don't have to think anymore of the device compatibility issues. Uh, Regarding the activities, the resources the same as the modular ones. Uh, Still you need to make sure that the resources are available to the students, and if possible the school and the teacher could provide kits help students to do the experiments that we require. Still be the same with guidance. As much as possible there's no guidance or minimal guidance, and if there's guidance there must be support from the parent or any able member of the family. So that's modular, and off printed modular and offline modular. The only difference is the mode. Okay? So sorry, the format. Because the one is in paper, the one can be digital. Also, I forgot to add, no, since your offline digital modality, you have the worksheets in the tablet, in the laptop of the student. You also need to create that your worksheets are fillable, meaning they could just type in their answers on the worksheet so that they don't need to print it. So they just need to again save the file, submit it to you for checking. It's quite There's a lot of tasks to do when it comes to offline digital modality. It's because of the technical capabilities, the technical requirements that you need to resolve besides creating those laboratory experiments. Next, we go to the online distance learning. So online distance learning, there's internet at home. The variety of devices may again pose problem. Even the internet connection may pose problem. As we all know, internet connection in the Philippines is not that good, not as fast as other countries. So we always encounter internet connectivity issues. When we say synchronous, you're on the same time with the students, teaching them, asking them can be done online using a learning management system and other tools. So you need to have a learning management system, be it a paid one, a free one, or a social media site such as Facebook, because there are already modes by which Facebook can be used as a platform, as a management system. So what activities or experiment can you modify for the online distance learning setup? First, you still need to provide the simple, safe experiment that could be done at home, but there's a sort of an add-on. So as we go on from the printed, from the offline to the synchronous, you will see that the variety, the availability of activities increases. So there are additional activities that we could use. For example, for the Synchronous online distance learning, since the students have devices, they are online, they have computers, we could provide them virtual simulations, remote labs such as the PET, the CK12, the CK12, and the Concord lab, so that they could perform their own experiments at home. So depending on technical compatibilities, and you need to also check with the students. And I think most of the virtual simulations works naman with through the laptops and the tablets because they are coded with HTML and they could easily be opened by using a browser. So there's much option right now for students. There should be a mix of hands-on and the digital ones. So for those that are really hard to convert with the hands-on, you convert it with the digital ones. And you just don't need to provide your students with the digital experiment or simulation. You also need to provide students with a worksheet similar to the printed one so that they will know what to do with all those buttons, or what are the goals of clicking all those buttons when it comes to the simulations. What activities can you do? For the synchronous one, just like the picture that I saw earlier, the teacher may demonstrate in a synchronous session real time with the student. So the teacher will really present the experiment online as a demonstration because the students will have reagents at home, materials at home, or the teacher demonstrate it so that the students could do it at a later time at their own and then record themselves or answer the worksheet. And if ever there might be some students who might miss the live session, you could record it so that it could be ready for the asynchronous one. So yeah, basically, you just need to you could do the experiments that you usually do in your laboratory, except that those required maybe a fume hood unless you have a fume hood at home. But definitely, you can transform it and then uh, do it in front of a camera in front of the laptop. Although you really have just to check if there are some hazards that are being posed by doing the experiments at home. So still, doon po tayo sa mga safe, simple experiments for the laboratory. For the synchronous one, worksheets or other evidence of learning is still required. But if you will see, there are again options. No? The students don't just need to provide the printed modules, the worksheet, but they could also enhance their evidences of learning by providing multimedia output such as videos, photos, so on and so forth. And actually, I saw this online. This is a video from Wancho. Wancho is an artist. I'll show you the video. Oops.
Ang first step dito ay place about 10 ml of distilled water in a glass container. Add 5 ml to the extract solution and observe the color. 10 ml is, so this is 60.
I think may audio issues na ako right now. Pero in this video, in this vlog of Wancho, he is a college student. They was asked by their professor to conduct a simple experiment at home. He's a college student, I think from LaSalle. It's the red cabbage experiment, the famous one for acid base. And he actually recorded himself doing the experiment. Actually, not as a part of submitting as a proof of learning evidence to his teacher, to his professor that he did the experiment, but to just record his experience. To just record his experience,
Siguro 5 ml.
sorry, just to record his experience po at home doing this. And then actually, if you will see, this experiment has been is a quote-unquote required experiment or a famous experiment for grade 7 students, the acid-base indicator. But the difference is we most of us use eggplant indicator. So yeah, if you need to provide assessment evidences of learning or sort of reflection with your students, because there are alternative options, there are a lot of mode, they could also present a video just like this. So also for synchronous online distance learning, assessment can be done using online assessment tools, and you could easily identify students who would need help. Unlike with the modular one, matagal nyo po bago ma-receive yung tamang sagot. And there are a lot of online assessment tools like Kahoot, Quizlife, Reinventing, Quizzes, and of course, Quipper. I think Quizzes, Kahoot are free. Quipper is free for public schools. We have a memorandum for the public schools with DepEd on the use of Quipper, but the only difference is we also offer a different set of materials for our private school clients. So you may use those online assessment tools, be it a pre-lab or a post-lab assessment for your students. Assessments can also be done by posting in discussion forums. From the video multimedia output from the quizzes, they could also share the experiences in discussion forum. Post their experience, what are their thoughts on doing the experiments, do they have a hard time? They could also share with their fellow students the data that they gathered, especially if the students would need trials in the experiments. So they could just share their data and they could still do collaboration, some sort of collaboration. And I think since we're talking again about technology, uh, compatibility issues, technicalities might be another problem with the students. What can you, teachers and schools can provide? That since it's online, teachers could provide regular online consultations with students via synchronous or asynchronous, either one-on-one session, messaging features, or a one-on-one video call that will help students, especially if the student is having a hard time doing the experiment or he or she would like to clarify. Or for example, the students don't have guidance at home, but the experiment needs guidance. So the teacher may assess if I could help the student remotely, kung kaya ba. So for the synchronous one, collaboration is possible among students online because they have a means. So they could create their own groups, their own chat groups, online video meetings so that they could share their data, share their experiences, what happened in the experiment, so that when answering, say, the guide questions, the pod lab questions, they could exchange insights on what are the possible errors in the experiments, how could they improve the experiment, what they did wrong, so on and so forth. The only difference with the synchronous and asynchronous is the time frame. So for the asynchronous one, you could do everything that is being done by the synchronous online distance learning is that time is not anymore a consideration. So the teacher may use the recorded lab. The teacher may record the lab and then provide it later on so that the teachers could view it. But I would encourage you teachers not just to post the video online. You also need to provide interactivities. Here's a example. For example, if you're creating a video, it's very hard to get feedback of the student because it's not immediate feedback. So basically, for example, when you watch Dora, the famous Mexican character show, no? Dora asks you questions, but Dora assumes that you already have an answer. So, for example, do you see the map? There's a pause, and then the Dora, you intentionally would say yes. So in the synchronous one, you don't easily get the feedback of the student. So we can enhance uh, asking students questions by providing interactivities such as using play, post it, and near parts. These are two technologies that I also use. So for example, I post procedures of the experiments, and then during the procedure of the experiment, I ask questions so that there's a required pause for the students to reflect regarding the next step. For those naman who don't have access to Play Post It in their pad because it's premium, but for Play Post It, uh, you could have premium access. I think if you have an EDU email, there's some sort of again a video blogger. You know, we have a lot of time right now watching video blog. This is a video blog by a blogger. So he he inserted some interactivities in the YouTube video so that you could identify the next step. What can we possibly do with our experiments? if we do say, for example, step one, that you need to add a certain catalyst, you can provide two options, record two videos, that what if you place a catalyst and you did not place a catalyst. So you try to record it using a video to set up. And then the student will see na, if there's a catalyst, if the reaction is faster, if there's no catalyst, the reaction doesn't, the reaction takes very long. So there are some sorts of interactivities within the video. And I think a lot of teachers right now are doing video blogs, video lessons. But just a reminder for all of us, no, you it's not just converting your presentation files into videos, but still incorporating certain instructional design, such as multimedia principles of learning, so that your video will be maximized and it will be effective for your students. So yeah, I think that's it. And basically, since majority of our implementation, especially for the starting from the offline digital ones, the online distance learning, would require the integration of ICT. I think we must also reflect that implementing ICT in our classes or implementing those distance learning modalities doesn't start quickly. We have to plan it as early as now, but the planning should start with the leaders. So if you will see in this diagram, the effectiveness of any ICT program or as well as any learning modality program that we will use start with the leaders pushing our teachers, the parents, the students to do good. And then that's where the teacher would be motivated and initiative and provide initiative. And actually right now, it's also on this part that we should also provide motivation with our students. And then that comes the basic infrastructure that they should have, the internet, the devices, so on and so forth. And at the end of it, we could provide an innovative pedagogy by which we could successfully implement ICT or any learning modality that we have so that we will be able to help our students still achieve the goals of having face-to-face distance, face-to-face laboratory instruction versus the distance learning one. So yeah, I think that's it. We do have just one 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 again Slido question. So you could go back again to slido.com and let's see, based on our discussion, we have the printed one, the printed modular learning, the offline digital learning, the online distance learning synchronous, and the uh, online distance learning asynchronous. Uh, what distance learning modality would you most likely prefer to use in your classes, and what help would you need from your fellow teachers so that we could help you implement your uh, distance learning classes. So yeah. Anyone po who would like to share or maybe answer the survey question? We're waiting for your answers on the survey question.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Carlo. So we're now opening our session right now with question and answer. So there's one question from Dr. Mel Garcia of De La Salle. Are there legal concerns or SOPs when asking students to do experiments at home?
Uh, I would like to answer it based on a school's perfect perspective. I think it will depend on the school to implement if they would really like to do experiments at home for their students to do. Because I believe there has been already schools who have been implementing it uh, for the past months. So the SOP might be considered as long as it has been tested by the teacher that it's safe to do at home. There's no sort of quote unquote harmful chemical. Everything is just safe. And if ever there's there might be a need to check on hazards. The student should be aware of the MSDS, the safety requirement. What should you do if he or she spilled the reagent on her hands? But basically, I think for home chemistry experiments, we will most likely do kitchen chemistry naman po. So I also wouldn't encourage you to use like even NaOH, ACl. So we just go for the safe ones.
Okay, thank you, Carlo. To all participants, you may unmute your microphone if you wish to ask questions. If you don't want to personally ask it, you can raise your hand and we will facilitate. So this is from Miss Hazel Ramirez. Okay, so maybe I can read the question, but Hazel, you may also unmute your microphone if you wish to have your question be more articulated. So the question is, how can we ensure the development of 21st century learning skills, especially collaboration and communication skills in an ODL or MDL chem laboratory?
Actually, it's really hard right now for us to say implement com- collaboration, communication with the students, especially if you only have the printed ones, because you don't easily get the answers, the feedback of the student. But I think for the online distance learning setup, it will be easier for them to collaborate, especially on sharing their experiences, their data experiments, posting it